Hello from Rhiannon and me. Welcome to this evening's programme.
First tonight, the father on trial for murder after apparently confessing that he killed his baby daughter 25 years ago.
Norwich Crown Court has been hearing how David Riches told his son how he'd suffocated 6-week-old Melanin.
Riches was living at Cossey near Norwich at the time. He's denied the killing. Our correspondent Malcolm Robertson was in court.
David Riches, a man who it's alleged got so fed up with his baby crying he suffocated her. A man who the prosecution say was involved in a campaign of abuse against children and former partners for almost 20 years. When Melanin Riches died in July 1985, it was originally thought she'd suffered a cot death. But today the jury was told that a quarter of a century later, her father, in a conversation with his son, confessed to killing her. David Riches has denied murder and an alternative charge of manslaughter. He's also pleaded not guilty to a number of charges of assault and cruelty, although has admitted one count of assault. The prosecution alleged the murder of 6-week-old Melanin took place when David Riches was living in a house at Tower Close in Cossey, on the outskirts of Norwich. His son Micah told the court how he'd met his father in 2008 for the first time since he was a baby. That was at Bramerton Wood's End, a pub near Norwich, having earlier arranged a reunion at a guest house in Felixstowe. He said he was pleased to see his father, but there were questions he wanted answering. Prosecuting counsel Sally Howes QC outlined the conversation between them. Micah asked his father how Melanin had died. His father replied, "We've all done things we're not proud of." "What do you mean?" said Micah. "In the past it was different," said his father. "How did she die?" "I suffocated her." Micah also asked how he'd suffered a fractured skull when he was very young. He said his father had lashed out at him and had always regretted that. Norfolk Police's cold crime team began investigating the case after Micah Riches contacted them. A year ago, David Riches was arrested at Stansted Airport after arriving on a flight from France where he'd been living. The prosecution say the police uncovered a catalogue of abuse and that David Riches was involved in a reign of callous cruelty for almost 2 decades. The trial resumes tomorrow. Malcolm Robertson, Anglia News at Norwich Crown Court.
Well, next tonight, the people responsible for gritting roads across the region have been meeting to try and learn lessons following the coldest and iciest winter in years.
Yes, freezing temperatures for much of December, January and February saw stores of salt and grit run low and led to a cut in some gritting services. Well, today, a national salt summit at Silverstone in Northamptonshire was organised to try and prevent those problems from happening again. Claire McGlasson has this report.
First, as the big chill tightens its grip on our region, a warning tonight that the freezing weather is expected to get worse throughout the week.
Of one of the minor roads in Suffolk, which are no longer being treated to ensure that salt supplies last for as long as possible.
Gritting lorries have been out on 17 of those days, day and night.
There are warnings of heavier falls tonight and tomorrow.
The snow kept falling, and the supplies of salt were dropping just as quickly. Roads gridlocked, emergency services stretched. So what went wrong? The big question they were trying to answer at True Grit, a salt summit at Silverstone today. Roger Rumsey came for answers.
It must not be just another talking shop. They must take note of and make decisions. And one of the things is about footpaths. You neglect them at your peril. They've got to be cleared because the problem is you've got too many people falling over, damaging themselves, and that again is then an on-cost to the community.
It was the coldest winter here for 15 years, but many councils had underestimated the problem and hadn't stockpiled sufficient salt. Shops sold out and sand was stolen from beaches as people tried to go it alone. So have any lessons been learnt?
Clear the way. Thousands of tonnes of salt was wasted this year when it was put down on top of fallen snow, which simply doesn't work. Prioritise where the gritters go to keep at least one route open to every village. And be prepared. The emergency services are rehearsing their response to cold weather.
Just a few of the suggestions at today's conference, which was organised by Northamptonshire County Council. They're angry they had to bail out other areas and share their salt supplies.
It actually ran our stocks down very, very low, much lower than we would have liked them to be.
Today the sun was shining. A welcome break for gritter Jack Bellamy. He's been doing the job for 50 years.
You get job satisfaction when you've opened the road up and everything's running well. I like it when the snow's there, but obviously the public doesn't.
So while the experts discuss and debate the problems past, Jack says he'll just get on with the job. Claire McGlasson, Anglia News, Silverstone in Northamptonshire.
That cold weather did just go on and on and on, didn't it?
Tell me about it.
Pleased to see the back of it now, though. Well,
I really like the name of that conference, though, True Grit.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Now, when Gordon Brown chose East Anglia for his family's summer holiday a couple of years ago, he said they'd all had a fantastic time.
Well, Sarah and their kids might have done, but did Mr Brown? A new book claims that he actually hated every minute of his stay in Suffolk and didn't even know where Southwold was before he went there.
So was it all a cynical plan, as the book suggests, to connect with Middle Britain? Our new political correspondent, Matthew Hudson, is here to tell us all, complete with book. So, Matt, who do we believe, then?
Well, it does entirely depend who you talk to, Jonathan. Downing Street this afternoon referred me to comments that Mr Brown made after his holiday, in which he said he and his family had had a lovely time, that the people had been absolutely charming. But as you say, Andrew Rawnsley's new book does paint a very different picture of Mr Brown's stay in this quintessentially English resort. He says that the whole thing was Mrs Brown's idea, that he wanted her husband to connect with Middle England. But he then goes on to quote an admittedly anonymous friend of Mr Brown as saying that he had no idea where Southwold was before he went, and that he had hated every minute of his stay there.
Dear.
Well, you know, you can always find people in Southwold. There's tourists there 12 months of the year. We went there today to ask them what they thought. Perhaps not surprisingly, most of them disagreed with Mr Brown's perspective.
I just can't understand it.
Can't understand it.
Can't understand
we
it
love
at
walking
all.
up the pier and back.
Yes,
Not quite so much today, but...
Depends what you want from a holiday, I suppose. And we want peace and quiet.
I suppose there's a certain section of people who wouldn't enjoy it because they would want to have a little bit more action, I suppose. But it's very much a traditional seaside place, and it's great.
I think Southwold's a bit unique because it's still a bit old-fashioned. It's still got a bit of old-fashioned thing about it, hasn't it?
Well, Matt, gorgeous day there today. It may not have been Gordon Brown's cup of tea, but there are plenty of other famous faces who are very fond of Southwold, aren't there?
Indeed, Rhiannon. I mean, there are days you go there and you're literally tripping over the good and the great. Twiggy, of course, lives there. The crime writer P.D. James has a second home there. Richard Curtis, the TV and film writer and director, he's a fan of the place. Really depends what your tastes are. Holidays are terribly personal things.
Indeed, very personal things indeed.
Rumours that your knees have been out there as well, is that right?
On occasion, Jonathan, on occasion.
Well, it seems Southwold didn't do it for the PM, but what about you? Are there any holiday spots you'd never go back to, perhaps?
Well, or perhaps there are maybe a few places in East Anglia that you could suggest Gordon Brown might like to head to instead this summer. Get them into our usual email address. You can see it on the screen now, and we look forward to reading them.
We do indeed. Right, it's great to have you with us this Tuesday.